Here's a question I want you to think about. Where do things start going wrong in your business? Not where they explode, not where clients complain, not where your team scrambles to fix things, but where the first crack appears. For most businesses, the answer isn't delivery. It isn't automation. It isn't even the tech stack. It's intake. The very first moment information enters your system. And today, we're talking about why intake is the most important system in your business, whether you realize it or not. Welcome back to Tech Talks with Grace, the show where we turn operational chaos into clarity one system at a time. Over the last several episodes, we talked about data integrity, workflow mapping, scoring readiness, and real-world AI use cases. And now we're entering Pillar 5, Intake Excellence and First Touch Systems. This pillar is about the moment everything begins, because intake determines how fast things move, how clear your team feels, how reliable your systems become, and whether automation helps you or hurts you. Today's episode is called Why Intake is the Most Important System in Your Business. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why intake shapes every downstream system, how poor intake creates invisible delays and rework, what strong intake actually looks like in real businesses, and how to start improving yours without rebuilding everything. Let's get into it. Intake is where momentum is created. Momentum in a business isn't created at delivery. It's created before delivery ever starts. Intake is the moment a lead becomes a client, a request becomes a task, information becomes action. And when intake is unclear, everything downstream slows down, even if the rest of your systems are, quote unquote, technically working. Here's what a weak intake looks like. Information comes in differently every time. Details are missing or unclear. Teams have to figure it out later. Follow-ups depend on memory. Automation hesitates or fires incorrectly. And here's the key truth. Every downstream problem is more expensive to fix than an upstream one. If intake is unclear, CRM data becomes unreliable, automations will misfire, delivery teams improvise, clients feel the friction, and leadership loses the visibility they need. Intake is the gatekeeper, and if that gate isn't controlled, nothing behind it can be trusted. Let's talk about experience. Both client experience and the internal experience, because intake shapes both. Let's talk about the client experience first. From the client's perspective, intake answers one question. Do these people know what they're doing? When intake is strong, expectations are clear, communication feels intentional, the process feels professional, and the client feels confident. On the inverse, when intake is weak, the clients have to repeat themselves, they're asked for information multiple times, they're unsure what happens next, and so confidence drops before work even begins. So what happens from your internal experience or the internal team's perspective? From your team's perspective, intake answers a different question. Do I have what I need to do this well? A weak intake creates Teams messages asking for clarity or clarification on a question, follow-ups that end up delaying all the work, again, downstream or almost immediately. They're guessing instead of executing, and then they're frustrated and having to rework everything they just did. Again, on the inverse, a strong intake for the internal experience, it ends up creating clarity, confidence, faster execution, and fewer interruptions. This is why intake is not an admin task, it's an experience-designed system. Let me introduce you to a very familiar scenario. We'll call this company Summit Creative, a growing agency. Summit Creative had very talented people. They had good tools and solid delivery frameworks. But things still felt slow, projects started late, details were missing, The team kept asking the same questions, and leadership thought they had a delivery problem. They didn't. The real issue, once we mapped their workflow, showed up immediately. Their intake had 3 different entry points. It used free text fields for critical information. It collected different details depending on who handled the call. And it didn't define a ready to start status. As a result, their projects entered delivery incomplete. Teams filled in gaps themselves and were guessing. Automation could not reliably trigger, and timelines started to slip. So how did they fix this? Remember, we don't overhaul, we don't restart, we reset. So they didn't overhaul their delivery or their delivery system, they fixed intake. They created one canonical intake form, standardized their required fields, defined a clear intake complete state when they had all their data, and they aligned their intake data with the CRM and the project tools. You're starting to see a pattern here, hopefully. So what was the result? Within 30 days, their project start times improved dramatically, internal questions dropped, automations became reliable, and the clients felt the difference immediately. The lesson learned here is scaling didn't require more people. It required better intake. Let's connect this to efficiency. So we're going to connect intake to efficiency. Every time information is missing, unclear, or inconsistent, your system pauses. Someone asks a question. Someone waits. Someone improvises. Those pauses add up. A strong intake reduces these decision points. It removes the guesswork. It enables automation. And it protects delivery timelines. The weak intake creates an invisible drag. And here is the most important takeaway. You cannot automate around a bad intake. Automation only works when the data is structured, the fields are predictable, and workflows are consistent. Intake is where that structure begins. So let's make this practical for you. Here's what I'd like you to do after this episode. I'm going to give you 3 different steps that you can take and act on. First step, list your actual intake steps. Write down how information enters your business. Write down every form, call, email, or handoff. And also write down where the data first becomes official. Don't optimize yet here, you're just observing. The second step, you're going to identify one delay point. You're going to ask yourself these 3 questions. Where do we usually pause? Where do the teams, or all teams, one team, every team, where do teams ask the follow-up questions? And where does work get stuck waiting for information? That's your intake bottleneck. And the third thing I'd like you to do is standardize one field. Okay, here's where you can take that action. Pick one critical piece of information and make it required. Remove free text if possible. And define what correct looks like. Small changes here create outsized impact. Those micro actions we talk about in earlier episodes create this massive impact at the end. What comes next? Here's what I want you to remember. Intake is not paperwork. It's not admin. It's not something to rush through. Intake determines momentum, clarity, automation readiness, and client confidence. When intake is strong, everything feels lighter. Today, you learned why intake is the most important system in your business. And so in the next episode, we'll take the next step, designing a clear, consistent intake workflow that your team can follow and your systems can trust. No overhauls, just structure that works. Visit growclarity.io today to learn more about your weakest bottleneck and where you can improve your intake. I'm Grace, and this is Tech Talks with Grace.